Hi, I'm going to tie the Sedotti's Feather Slammer in the 6 to 7 inch size, and I originally tied this to copy pretty exactly the immature size Menhaden that were around my home waters on Long Island Sound back in 1990, 1991, and I'm going to tie it essentially as a trout fly. I found that it was an incredible fly for big trout when I used it in a lot of places out west and in the upper Midwest and down south also. And as you can see, it's tied in the deceiver style. Tied essentially like a deceiver, the bucktail in the front and the feathers in the back, but it has so many small attributes that really make the fly unique, as it were. So what I'll start with is putting the trailer hook on first, and I'll have some I have some 60-pound plastic coated braided wire, and that'll be my connection wire from the front hook to the rear hook, to the trailer hook. Now originally I tied the fly only with a hook in the front, and when I first brought it out to use in Montana, and it was dynamite catching fish on the beaverhead in Montana, I simply had the single hook, and it worked okay. I missed a lot of fish, but I caught a lot of fish, throwing it in against the bank to the bushes and retrieving it out. And so that worked fine, but I started putting a trailer hook on it after I was up in Michigan, fishing it in Michigan. And to make a long story short, I'll make it longer a little later, what I did was I missed two 28-inch fish in a 100-yard stretch of stream on the Osable River, and I wasn't going to have that anymore. Especially the next day, I missed a 30-incher on the Manistee, and I did it simply because the trout grabbed the fly in about the middle of the fly, didn't get the front hook, and I said, forget it, I'm going to put a trailer hook in there. I'm going to get those fish. So here's what I do. I use this specifically. I use my trailer hook as a 2-aught Gamakatsu octopus hook. 2-aught because of a certain purpose for the action of the fly. It has a certain weight that it has, so I like to use this one. And I don't mind if it's offset like that. I think it hooks the fish even better. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put that wire through the eye of the hook, and I'm going to have it so that the bend is upwards. So I have sort of a bend a little upwards when I put that front hook on there. So make sure that that hook will ride with the fly and it won't go dipping below. I'm pretty concerned with that. And I'm going to bend that like that there at that point. That should be okay. I'd like to perhaps get the entire shank of the hook, but if I don't, I'm okay. And I'm going to get that if I can, like that. I'm just going to bend it in with my hands. And sometimes I'll use a plier, sometimes I use my teeth to do that. If I can if I can just get that crimped pretty well, I'm in good shape. I'm going to spend all the time crimping my fly. That's okay. Right there. So I have that like that going through on the bottom, as you see, and then I am just going to wrap the hook with my thread. Just so I get a base. And usually what I like to use for most of my streamer tying is Danville's flat wax thread. I've also used monocore and their various streamer threads that people use nowadays, but I began using flat wax thread, which was recommended to me, and it's worked really, really well ever since, so I stuck with it. And color doesn't matter. I have a bright fluorescent red color And I think maybe that'll help to, you know, that'll help to attract fish, but I don't think so. I don't think the color really matters at all. It looks pretty. So I'm going to put that in like that. And if I can, I'm going to get that back there. I'm pretty close to there. All right. And I'm just going to get that in my vise again. And I'm going to ow. Again, I gotta use a trailer hook for this fly because most of the time the trout aren't going to try to eat the fly. They're going to try to, it looks like, just stun it. Maybe try to kill it first, and they'll bite around the middle of the fly, a little further back from the middle of the fly. So you're gonna hook more fish with a trailer hook or a hook right around the middle of the fly. Okay, that's good. And you see what I did? I secured it down to the shank with one wrap, and then I'm going to go and I'm going to secure the top part so that the hook is just not going to come out. And even if I use this in salt water, that hook's not going to come out. If I hook a white marlin on this thing, the hook isn't going to come out. The rear hook might straighten, but the wire isn't going to come off this thing. No way, no way. Yeah, so what I'll do, I'll wrap this a bunch of times. I don't know how many times I'll go back through, just so it covers it pretty well. And after that, what I'm going to do, I'm not going to do it today because of time, but what I would do is I usually take my Sally Hansen hard as nails or some lacquer, and I'll apply a few coats over that. I'll let a light coat in there, I'll let it dry, put another light coat in there, I'll let it dry, put a third coat in there, I'll let it dry, just so I have a protective coating. So that when, you know, when this hook wears, when you catch a bunch of fish, that the thread isn't going to abrade, and it'll give some, you know, some endurance to your fly. So that's all I do, and then I'm going to tie that off there. Ooh. Maybe I'll do it twice with this one, but then if I put that light, coating in there with the hardest nails, then I'm not going to have any trouble with that thing coming out. You know, I'll just paint that on there and I'll be good. So after that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach the trailer hook to the front hook. And I have a Gamakatsu worm hook that I use for the front hook. A spinnerbait hook should work too. Originally what I used, and what I still use in salt water, I use a 4-rod Gamakatsu octopus hook. I haven't hooked the trout quite as well on that octopus hook in the front as I do with, you know, with that worm hook. Alex Lotfus told me about using a worm hook, and that he hooked more fish doing that. So I started doing that with the fly. So what I want is, I want to have this hook, I want to have the bends of the hook 2.5 inches apart. So what I will do is I'll get my tape measure, and this is because of I can get maximum action of the fly in doing this with this particular hook. So what I'll do is I'll get the bend of that hook at 0, and I want the start of the end of the bend of this hook at 2.5 inches. And if I do that, as you can see, they're about 2.5 there, and I want to be, you know, pretty close. And I know that I can get that right at that point. I'll take a bend there in the front so I know where it is on the front hook, where that point is on the front hook, and I'll leave that And then I'm going to just easily wrap my fly here. Boy, tight in. And with this spinnerbait hook, or actually this worm hook, I have so much longer of a shank to work with. It makes it a lot easier tying the fly, because I'm going to tie the fly where the feathers and the bucktail are high and low tied along the shank of the hook. Meaning I'm going to have feathers behind, feathers in front, and then bucktail high and low tied sequentially all the way up the shank of the hook to get the action I want. Must be Giordano. Okay, that'll work like that. Wow, okay. Good. So what I can do is I can actually I'm gonna put that wire through the eye of the hook like that, and I'm going to cut that wire off on the bottom right around the rear at the end there. Some fly tying videos today. What we do is you can do this all in fast motion, sped up. Can you do that? And again, I tied this originally so that it would have the accurate shape of the menhaden, of the immature menhaden, and it was whoop. And of course, in having that shape, I was really anal in trying to get that shape exactly, and it ended up being such a nice shape for an alewife or a shad or any other type of herring, be freshwater or saltwater for that matter. And so it was a great shape for any freshwater fly. I mean, the thing looked like, just looked like a herring in the water. It had the silhouette, and I was really concerned about that. And I got it, and I'll show you how I got it pretty easily. And it resulted in having more feathers on the fly in different places than your standard deceiver. And also, I ended up, in order to get what I wanted, I ended up high and low tying lots of clumps of bucktail on the hook, and that also added some very attractive attributes to the fly, which trigger strikes in any game fish, but especially in trout. So see what I have there? I've got my trailer hook, and I usually want the trailer hook pointing up. For whatever reason, I think it's just the hook point is more inside the feathers, inside the body of the fly. And I think maybe I can hook up more doing that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of these feathers, and I'll show you how I choose the feathers. And I like nice wide webby saddle hackles or schlappen feathers. I have such a hard time nowadays finding good schlappen feathers. I virtually can't do it. And on occasion, I can find some really good saddles. You know, I go to any fly shop around the country that I stop in. First thing I do, I go to their feathers and I go see what kind of saddle hackle they have. They have nice, wide, webby, white saddle hackle or whatever other color I want. I will definitely go and grab those things. So, and usually I'm going to pull that thing out to where, with this one, I'm going to work with right to where the stem starts getting thick, just to where the stem goes from thin to thick, or from thick to thin, that transition point. I don't want it too thin and I don't want it too thick, simply because when I have it just right, I can work with that feather so much better. And it's plenty long enough to give me a very long fly. Let's see how long that'll be. That'll be about ½ an inch beyond that. So that'll give me a fly in total that's probably yeah, it's going to give me a fly that's about 6½ inches long. And usually I tie this fly from 6 to 8 inches, commonly from about 6½ to 7½ inches. So that's fine. And I want to make each feather symmetrical. And I want that stem, if I can have it, to be the exact same width. Because if it's the exact same width or real close, then none of those feathers are going to spin. And that's one thing I don't want them doing. I don't want them spinning. So that should be right. And I should have 4 there. And then I know that what I'll have in looking at that, when I put my hook down, I'm going to cut this off right here so I can get a frame of reference. I have my hook down there, and that's attached right at that point. What I want just above that, if I can, is I want to use a couple of small feathers, and I just use shorter saddle hackles. And I originally did this to get myself a really good natural profile of the Menhaden or the alewife, and I didn't realize it was going to add to the action and the effectiveness of the fly, in essence of triggering more strikes. I didn't realize it at the time that it would do it, and it really did. So that feather is going to be as long as where I'm going to tie it in on the shank, up above these feathers just a little bit, and it's going to go to where that feather comes out of its bend, going into the webbier part of the feather. You know, I have all this marabou looking stuff, and I'm going to have that till about that point, because then it's going to give me that bottom part of the fish, bottom part of the herring. And I'm going to put one on top too. So I'm going to have 2 on the bottom, 2 on the top. I use 4 feathers for my back feathers. I don't need more. I prefer not having fewer. If I end up with 3, like a fish ends up breaking one of the feathers off, the fly is very functional. It can still catch fish very well. So I'm going to do this here, and I want the stems of this feather, I want it to be symmetrical with the other one. And for this one, I'm going to tie this one in. I'm going to tie these in on the shank first before I start putting all the weight on the fly. So as you see, I got praying hands, just like a regular deceiver, and I'm going to tie that on the shank of the hook first. Alright, got that in there, probably as good as I can get there. I want to try to get them equal and the same. One's twisting a little bit, but that's okay. I should be okay there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the wire now. See, I'll put the wire on, and then I'm going to be putting my big feathers, my long feathers, up in front of that. And I'm going to put the next other two back feathers, I'm going to put them on so I have some .030 weighted wire. With my other hook, what I used was .025 weighted wire, and since this hook shank is a little thinner, I'm going to use wire that's just a little heavier. And this should, and I'm going to leave some space up on the head, especially with this hook, because I have such a long shank. And I'm still going to wrap this stuff in. You're just going to wrap this in right to the end. It's going to give me a tremendous base. It's going to give me a great base in order to put that weighted keel in there. And I originally put the weighted keel in there simply because that's what I did with the bigger fly, and I tied a bigger Menhaden fly first. So I simply tied a weighted keel in there. Since I put it on the bigger one, I also put it on the smaller one, and it helped the bigger one cast a lot better. And I'm going to take some of this off, just a little lighter, and I should be real good there. And but what I ended up doing was I ended up having, giving the fly so much better action and adding some strike triggering qualities, which I wouldn't have without the weight on it. Helps the fly get underneath the surface of the water quickly, which is important for a bigger fly. And also, it would help that fly get down a little further, but it would also give the fly different action and more action, and would give it some attributes that were unanticipated, but really helped the fly be that much more effective. Here's, it's an example of how weight in your fly can really, really help make the fly that much more attractive in a lot of ways. And after that, what I did was I would simply cut 8 3/8 inch long pieces of the weighted wire, and I'll put 4 on the bottom of that shank, right around that wrapped lead, which gives me a wider base so I can get the keel in there. And then I'm going to wrap 4 more on top of that, a series of 4. So now I know they're about 3/8 of an inch long, and I'm going to have them right here at the end of that. And what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to wrap all those 3/8 inch pieces of weighted wire I'm going to secure them down. And as you see, my base is wide enough so that they are all on the bottom. They're not twisted around. They're not twisted around the sides at all. That's one of the reasons why I use that weight, or I use that wrap, and I wrap the hook shank simply because it simply builds me a base that I can put my keel on very, very easily, and it adds more weight to the fly, which can help with the action of the fly. I'll explain that later, but also it helps get the fly under quickly and helps keep the fly down a little easier, and it'll also give the fly a little different action. Now, I cut 4 more pieces before, and I'm going to put them, they're the same size as what is below. They fit easily on top of the first 4 that you laid down. I don't even have to use my hand in doing that, whatever. And if they come out the back a little bit and it's not quite as symmetrical as would be perfect, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You're not putting too much weight on the fly. And there's your keel. Right? It's 8 3/8-inch pieces, 4 on top of 4, so that what you do is you make a rectangular looking box. And that's your keel. Now, what's the keel going to do with the fly? How's it going to help the fly? Well, it's going to do one thing. It's going to help the fly track very straight in the water. You know, your fly is not going to be twisting. It's not going to be, when you retrieve it, it's not going to come in where it isn't straight in the column. I think that attracts a lot more fish. It gets a lot more bites when you have a fly that does that. Also, what the keel is going to do is it's going to have a tendency, since it's in the front part of the fly, in the end, your fly's going to have a tendency when you slack off on it to dive head first like that. A little bit, and a little faster than it would than you'd have if you have an unweighted fly. It's also going to give you a little bit of this on a straight retrieve. Right, little bit more action that way on a straight retrieve. And very significantly in triggering strikes is as when you're retrieving that fly across currents, especially if you're retrieving well, literally cross current, you're casting 90 degrees to the direction of the current, as I fish my streamer flies from drift boats much of the time. When your fly goes across currents, it may have a tendency to twist, to be pushed like that. And what the keel's going to do, it's going to actually pull that fly back into equilibrium, just like a natural bayfish. If a natural bayfish goes out of equilibrium, it's going to have a tendency to want to go back into that equilibrium. And it's going to happen to a weak fish more than a strong fish. And if a big trout sees that, he sees a more vulnerable fish, it's going to induce that strike a lot better, and that keel's going to do it to that fly. Besides that, when you bring that thing across multiple currents, and that fly is going to be doing this, right? Or as it goes across, it sachets and it moves and it comes back into equilibrium. That weight gives you better action when that fly is pushed by the different speed currents. And man, does that trigger a strike. That's some of the attributes of a keeled fly, and it can make all the difference in the world. And there are more strike triggering qualities, but I'll get to them as we tie the fly. All right, I got my keel in there, so what I want to do next is I want to put the long feathers in. And I already prepared them to be tied on the fly. And I want 2 feathers in one direction, 2 feathers in the other, sort of like praying hands, like a standard deceiver with my saddle hackles. And I will simply, do I got them all? I think I do. And I want them all pretty like that. I'll do that with white feathers. I'm told, you know, not to do that with like colored feathers, but I don't know. And do I like them like that or like that? Like that's fine. I'm simply going to put these on the top. And see, I have a base to tie that in with. And do you see that? As you can see, the base is wide enough so I can get all those feathers in there, and I have my stems are just a little thicker than very thin. So hopefully, once you get that in good, and they're all symmetrical in width, then they're going to go very straight on that hook, and they should be secured just in the position that I want. So I hope. Yeah, it looks like they are. Yeah, look at that, straight back, as you see, straight back, and that's how I want them for my long feathers. And I'm going to get them close to each other, and I'm simply going to use a lot of pressure in the front of that wrap, not towards the back. In the back of the wrap, I'll be firm, fairly light but firm, but in front of that, oh, 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, I'm going to put a lot of pressure in to anchor those stems into the fly so they don't pull out. And I know I put a lot of pressure in there, so I don't think they're going to pull out. I have my feathers from the bottom in there, down below, and I'm pretty good. And let's see how long that fly is going to be. It's going to be a little longer than 6.5 inches. I'm curious. My fly is going to be, yeah, it's going to be close to 7 inches long, which is what I love in this fly. I don't care if it's 8 inches, 7.5, 7, 6.5, just around that size. And we're in good shape. Now, when I went to Michigan and I pulled this fly out, what they were using in Michigan is none of their streamers were longer than 4.5 inches. You know, they were using 3.5 inch streamers, and they were using articulated leeches, which were 4 inches, 4.5 inches, but they really weren't using longer stuff than that. I brought this thing out, 7 inches, 7.5 inches. One of my flies was 8 inches, and they said, "What are you doing with that?" I said, "Well, big trout, I think, are going to grab this. Let's see." So, you know, that's when I started using a fly that size there that they simply hadn't used before. This was on the Manistee River, also on the Au Sable, but primarily on the Manistee, where my buddy Russ Madden, my good friend, was guiding and still guides. So I've got that on there. Then what I want to do is I want to put in two more small feathers, and I have it, and I'm going to have them right up to about there. So let's see. I pull that off. And I want to have those smaller feathers so that, yeah, do you see that? So right where that bend starts narrowing and going into the heavier webbed part of the feather, I want that feather to end there, so I have that real good herring shape. It's actually a great immature bunker shape silhouette, but it's a great herring shape anyway, and it does another great thing which I didn't anticipate, and I'll tell you about when I put them on there. I'll show you what I mean. Let's see. And it doesn't matter, in a way, it doesn't matter if one feather is a little shorter than the other one, just a little shorter, you're okay. As long as you're close, then you're in good shape. There you go. That's good. And I can put that on. And yeah, look at that. And I put that on just ahead. So I am actually high tying and low tying the feathers. See that? So if I'm high tying and low tying the feathers, I'm in good shape. You see that? That should go back around there, and that bucktail that I put ahead of there is going to push that down to the fly. Now, what's a great ancillary advantage of having feathers on the top and on the bottom? Well, what I found out was that not only do you have the big feathers in the back having action, right, but you have these feathers on each side which have their own separate action, and the ends of the feathers, right, you'll have end wiggling here, end wiggling here, and you'll have this wiggling back here. You have simply that much more additional action to the fly. And as I add clumps of bucktail up the hook, you're going to have the ends of the bucktail all along as you move along the fly on the bottom and on the top. they're going to have that separate action too. So it's added action, and that has an even more and adds a more strike triggering quality to the fly. So this fly has a lot of strike triggering qualities, and that's what makes it good. That's what makes it fishy. All right, now that I've done that, I'm going to go to the bucktail part of the fly. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to put a clump of bucktail in on the bottom. I'm going to put it right on the start of the shank of that hook. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to have 3 clumps of bucktail on the bottom going up the shank and 3 on the top. So I will simply grab some bucktail, and you don't have to have too much bucktail per clump. And usually this fly can be tied well if you have a little bit of bucktail, or a little less, or a little more. It doesn't really matter. Some flies it does. This one it doesn't really matter. I simply wouldn't want to put too much bucktail in there. Then you have a hard time pulling everything in. Okay, so I took off the small hairs, and so I think for this particular hook, since it's so long, I'm just going to put them in on the top of the keel. And I want my bucktail to go just about to where that feather starts coming down into the wide webby part. Okay, that's pretty good. I like that, and I'm going to tie that in there, right on top. How nice. Right, I'm going to pull that in simply so that is all. Now I'm going to check it so it's all on the top of that keel. See, the keel is a base where I can easily tie in all that bucktail. So one step of the fly leads to the next step of the fly. And I'm anchoring, pinching and anchoring to get that in there good. And that's pretty good right there. I like that. And I'm just going to cut that off. And I'm fine. I'm good there. And make sure that's on there good. And then I'm going to tie some bucktail in on top of that. In fact, maybe I'll tie it in right there. That's a nice place to do it. And I'm going to put some white bucktail on top for this clump. Up above this clump, I'm going to go to the darker back. And pull out the small hairs. Yeah, pull out the small hairs. And I'm going to have this bucktail be about as long as the short feather, maybe a little shorter. Menhaden have. The head of menhaden is 1/3 the length of the body. And I think that's about the same for an alewife too. Again, an alewife looks very close to a menhaden. They're both herring, but the alewife isn't quite. It's wide-bodied. It isn't quite as wide-bodied, but the trout don't care. What's important is that you have a fly that has the silhouette of a fish, and as you'll see, this fly also is 3-dimensionally like the shape of a herring, like the shape of a menhaden, of an alewife, of a shad, which is real important too. It's got the silhouette, 3-dimensionally it's got the shape of the fish. So what you got is something that looks like the natural. And with all those feathers and materials, the thing and the movement of the fly, it looks alive in the water. It looks alive, and it looks like a fish. It looks and acts like a fish. And that's what predators like to eat. If they like to eat fish, they like a fly like that. So it's significantly different than the popular and very effective trout flies like the articulated leeches with marabou and rabbit and whatever. They really don't look like fish for the most part. I mean, they may look a little bit like sculpins and sometimes like lampreys for sure. But generally speaking, they don't look like baitfish. They don't act like baitfish. And if you're going to spin fish for trout, most of the time, what are you going to use? You're going to use a stick bait that looks like a bait fish. You're going to use a spoon, maybe, that looks like a bait fish. You can use a plastic shad, which looks like a bait fish. Well, should do that with streamer flies too. And when I brought this to Michigan, that was really probably the first time that they saw flies out there that looked and acted like fish. And of course, nowadays, I started tying this fly in 1991 and for saltwater in Long Island Sound, out of the waters of Greenwich, Connecticut, and Portchester, New York. And I wanted to copy the bait fish. And nowadays, you have tires like Blaine Chocolate with his Game Changer, that looks exactly like a fish, whatever, looks like a lure. Well, that's, what's evolved. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to do a clump on the bottom, and I'm going to do another white clump, and I'm going to do it up above that. I'm going to do it in the middle. And then I'm going to just do something more up top. I'm going to put some, I'm going to put the back in. So as you see, I don't have too little, I don't have too much, I don't think. It all adds up, one clump after the next. So I want this to be the same length as that clump or maybe a little shorter. If it's slightly shorter, that's good. If it's the same length, I'm okay. A little shorter, maybe preferably, because then again you have prominent ends all the way up the length of the hook shank. And more action you can get, the better. So, when they started using these things in Michigan, the guys who I fished with were Russ Madden and John Kessner and Alex Lacus, and primarily Russ and John. And when I left Michigan after that week, they started using the fly. I left them a bunch of flies. They started using them. They started calling the fly the Screaming Jesus. I said, well, why did you call it the Screaming Jesus? They didn't want to show anybody in Michigan the fly. They wanted to keep it to themselves. And they call it the Screaming Jesus because they'd be throwing the flies out there. And they say, Jesus, did you see the size of that one? Jesus, did you see the size of that one? Oh my God. They started raising, these much bigger brown trout in the Manistee River because they were using bigger flies. And flies that looked like fish, and flies that looked like they were in trouble. They looked alive in the water, and they were moving around with different action, and it was working. It was raising, the big predators, which is what they wanted. And what they did was they kept it a secret, but it was getting around that these guys in northern Michigan were using a fly, big fly that they were raising a lot of fish with and catching big fish. And some people south of there, like Kelly Newman, he didn't see the fly. I don't think he'd heard about it. He tried to tie a fly that looked something like it or what he thought it was. So he tied a big deceiver, and he didn't even know what the name of the fly was. It was a Sedotti's feather slammer. And so he started using that there. And I think after that, he brought the fly down to Arkansas. So it came from Long Island Sound to Michigan, right? From northeast saltwater fly fishing to Michigan. And then it also started trickling down to Arkansas after that. And of course, I'd been down fishing Arkansas for quite a while before that, since the late 90s. I'll get into that in a little bit. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to get some peacock herl for the color of the back. Do I want it longer? Yeah, but I don't have to have it super long. I'm okay. And I think I'll use a little more. You can either have very long peacock herl or like a medium. It can be way over to the back or not. It doesn't really matter. You see? It doesn't really matter. And you could use a lot, or you could use a little. Don't matter. Doesn't matter at all. And I want that here. And I'm putting it in here, and I'm not putting it in front of this simply because what I saw was originally I simply wanted to have a very true Menhaden shape. And I saw that if I did this in front of the fly, which was common at the end, when the fly was in the water, the peacock curl had a tendency to separate from the rest of the fly, and I didn't have a true profile. When I put this in at this point and then put bucktail in front of it, I had a true fish-shaped fly, and I had the dark, the dark remained on top, and it was, for lack of a better word, it was just uncut. It was true. Okay, so I get that in there, and it gives you that dark top of bait fish, and as you see, when I tie, I put a lot of pressure on my thread. Sometimes even break my flat wax thread. It's real tough stuff. It's real good for bigger flies. There's other stuff out there that's good for bigger flies too. But you see that? Okay, so I've got 2 there, 2 on the bottom. I've got 1 on top. So then what I'm going to do, I'm going to get my darker bucktail. Today I'm going to use blue. Usually I use either blue or olive. But today I'm going to use blue. And I'm just going to cut another clump of that and put it in front. So you see, as I'm building the fly, you see that I'm simply high and low tying materials along that hook shank. And you can see how those materials simply have their own end. I want that to be, if I can, about the same or a little shorter than what was behind it. And that looks pretty good to me right there. And I think I'll pull that behind. Let's see, will I want that? If I do that, I'm okay. I'm going to try to get it on top of that. So I'm going to try to get it right on top of there. Let's see if I can do that. Yeah, I think I got it. Wow. Woohoo, that's nice. All right, I've got that pretty good. And I'll pinch that so that all my bucktail stays on top. Yeah, that's pretty good. Wow, I got lucky. Isn't that a nice color contrast with the fluorescent red and that beautiful color blue? And I haven't noticed the difference really between a fly where I have a blue top or a green top. None has been more attractive, even one day to the next. I don't know, I just have a preference. Sometimes I like the blue, sometimes I like the olive, but they're about both the same. All right, so we'll go up ahead of that now. So we got that on there, and you see all that? You have all the ends of everything. Going to be wiggling there, 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 wiggling down there. Well, give you that nice action. Now, I'm getting close to ending the fly, so I'm going to pull out myself a little flash. I didn't necessarily like a lot of flash in this fly, just a good amount to maybe attract some fish. I've had other flies like the flash deceiver, which is primarily flash, and I've used that for trout. And Russ Madden was influenced, by that in like his flash monkey. And for this fly, I didn't like too much flash for whatever reason, even in just intuition, and even in saltwater, I didn't really use too much. And so what I'll do is I'm going to work on doing some stuff on the side of the fly. And I'm pulling more and more off, and again, it doesn't have to go all the way past the feather, as long as it moves, as long as it's back there 2/3 of the way, 3/4 of the way, whatever. I'm usually okay. I'm usually just fine with that, and that's good. Just like that's fine. I just want to have an effect on that. Just like that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bucktail over that, which is going to make the fly look better three-dimensionally. If a fish looks from the bottom, it's going to have that fish shape. And the guy who told me about that is one of the guys who's influenced my tying, is Bob Popovics, the famous saltwater famous tyer. And he told me about that early on. He had a big influence on what I did with one of my bigger original saltwater slammers, one of the 8-inch size jobs, so that I could get the thing to look three-dimensionally, more like a big bait fish. I didn't have to do it with this one as much. All I had to do is put a little bucktail on the side like this, and with all the materials of the rest of the fly, I made it wide enough so it really had that good three-dimensional look of a shad, and especially a menhaden or an alewife. So I've got some there on the side, and I'm okay. I'm okay with that. Good. Yeah, I'm good. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side of the fly. So now we're getting in towards the end of the fly. Good. And with that longer shank hook, you really have no trouble fitting every step in. All right, I got that there. You see that? And that is going to, especially with pressure when it's wet, when the fly's going through the water, that'll push down and it'll keep that flashaboo that's pretty flexible. That'll keep that back. That'll keep that on the fly. You won't have trouble with that wrapping around your hook or wrapping around your fly at all. And we'll go to the other side and we'll do the same thing. We'll get ourselves a little bit of flash, and we'll do that. So adding back to what I said before, I brought this fly to Michigan and started using it there. Back in perhaps the end of the 90s, 98, 99, 2000, 2001, somewhere in there. When I started, you brought it to Michigan and started using it in Michigan. And then I also brought the fly, in a sense, back in 2007. I'd been using it before. I'd started going to Arkansas at the end of the 90s, and at the beginning continued through 2000 and beyond. And I started using these flies in Arkansas during the day, but even at night. And they were real good at night. Sometimes I would tie a black slammer for night fishing in Arkansas. Again, I was doing that back in 1999, 2000, right at the beginning of the 2000s. And I was even tying a bigger fly down there. I tied a rainbow trout imitation made out of bozo hair, which was 11 inches long, and I wanted to copy a stalker trout. They stock 1 million stalker trout down there in the White River in a year, and so I thought that might be a good fly to copy that. I didn't use it that much, but I had an 11-inch fly that I was using down there. And then I also, the first time I spoke at the Southern Conclave in Mountain Home, I did streamer classes. I did one in the Conclave in 2007 and the Southern Conclave in 2009. I did streamer classes in both, and I brought these flies out, and I talked about using a fly like this feather slammer, during the day on the White River, and using it, influencing from Russ Madden and Kelly Gallup about, casting cross current, how they retrieve and whatever. I learned that in Michigan, and I was talking in Arkansas about that then. And I even brought out that 11-inch fly down there. And this was a long time before Dally's Fly Shop opened up. Okay, so I have that there, and I have that there, and good. And essentially, big flies like this, and big flies that look like fish and act like fish, actually went from Long Island Sound in New York and Connecticut out to Michigan, then down to Arkansas, and from Connecticut and New York down to Arkansas, and even went from like Michigan back to Connecticut and the Farmington River, and from Michigan back up to the Catskills. It all started, close to where those places are. Okay, so we'll finish this fly in two more things. We will put some white on the bottom, white bucktail on the bottom, and put a little, I don't have to be that thick anymore. See, that's not that big a clump. And that's going to be a little shorter, maybe, just a little shorter than what was in front of it. I have lots of room to do that. Okay. Okay, there, and push like that, as you see. And I'm going to do that in there like that. Good. See, another thing I wanted to say was that now I have the trailer hook is the right size, and it's the right weight, and it's the right distance behind this front hook, so that when I pull that fly with a very quick accelerated strip, it's going to go from side to side. It'll do that. It'll do that. It'll do that. And I was influenced in doing that. I had a fly called a Kickin' Chicken, which Russ Madden loved, and had that action doing that. And then Mike Schultz saw that fly, and he started tying flies like that around where he was fishing in, around the Detroit and the Lake St. Clair area, southern Michigan. Flies that had action. That's another strike triggering quality of this slammer. It'll do that. It'll sashay from side to side when you pull it in there, and that's because of the way it's weighted. The front of the fly slows the fly, and the back of the fly with all the weight will simply keep its momentum, and it'll shift it to the side and then go side to side with the other flies. Perhaps I originally thought about that concept from a fly that was tied by someone in the Bay Area in California, and it was mentioned on Dan Bland's bulletin board. And I tried to inquire about what that fly was like, and it didn't quite have that action, but I knew that it had action, and I was influenced by that. I wanted to add that to my fly. Originally in Michigan, my flies didn't have that, but they had that action as we got into the early 2000s down there. Okay, we have that there, and we got that there. So as you see, the fly has a lot of strike triggering qualities, and if you can get the more strike triggering qualities you can get in a fly, the more effective that fly is going to be for any game fish. But man, it makes all the difference in the world when it comes to trout. Okay, so we're going to just about end this thing up. After this, what I do is I simply attach a couple of eyes on the fly. Again, my influences in this fly have been, of course, Lefty Kreh with his deceiver. With a lot of my time, Bob Popovics, and of course the great the first person to tie big flies that looked like baitfish, actually looked like baitfish, was a guy named Bill Catherwood from Tewksbury, Massachusetts. And he tied these giant killers, which were 8 inches long, and they looked like saltwater baitfish. They looked like herring, and they looked like mullet. And he was the first one to do that. And he did this back in the late 50s and in the 60s. And he's in books, and Tom McNally wrote articles about him in Outdoor Life in the 60s. And when you look back, you know, he was the first to start with any type of fly that copied a baitfish closely, and that had, you know, had good baitfish action or whatever. And he's from Tewksbury, Massachusetts. One of the great ones. A lot of people don't know about him nowadays, but you know, again, he's one of the greats when it comes to streamer fly time. And the other guy who has so much influence, I'm surprised he's not mentioned more, is Dave Whitlock. Dave Whitlock's one of the first, you know, one of the guys from Oklahoma and the White River in Arkansas. He's responsible for all those big trout that they have in the White River down there now. Dave Whitlock tied flies for years, streamer flies that looked very closely like baitfish, that were the baitfish down there. And again, he's sort of neglected nowadays, but he's one of the originators. He's one of the greats, Dave Whitlock. Okay, as you see, I'm tying that head. And at the end, I want to get a nice shaped head if I can. I don't want to be too long. All right, I'm pretty good there, I think. Yeah, I'm pretty good there. All right, and I can just about tie off on this. I can just about tie it, and then I'm going to put eyes on the fly, but I may not do that right here like that because they're not going to dry so well. It'll be a little different, but you can see that on this fly. Or should I tie that? Yeah, so that's the tie for the most part. A lot of steps. Doesn't take too long to tie. You know, then when I attach the eyes, I'll do that usually with shoe glue, or I'll do it with, some people do it with goop. I also do it with, the waiter stuff. But I really like shoe glue because it's really tough. And you put the eye on there, and it'll look like a fly. Should I put the eye on? Yeah, okay. I'll do that. Okay. I've got an eye. It's, I believe, 10 millimeter. I'll have that on my... I'm not going to use everything. Right, I'm sorry, Ian. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to press it on there. And if I can get this right, probably around there. I want to leave my hook at there.
Is there a technique that you mentioned about getting the goop to the hook shank? There was a technique, I think, in one of your videos.
Oh, really? Of what I would do?
With the goop.
Yeah, what I would do is I would make sure that it was on the outer bucktail, like I did there. Right? What I got there. Do you see that? And I can pull that up like that. And what I'll do is I'll just put a ball of it. And this really works well, even with the really big slammers. And so I put a ball of that, if I can get it in there, on the bottom of the eye there, beneath that bucktail that was caught to it, and then I press that down like that. You see how beautiful that is? Ooh, man, that ain't gonna go away. And Tom Piccolo, who taught me how to tie flies, he was a great fly tyer. He's not famous, he's well known in certain areas. He's the one who said, Sedotti, I said, boy, how can I keep my eyes on, Tom? They keep coming off. I was using super glue at the time. He goes, Sedotti, buy some shoe glue. He goes, and use that fly. The last thing left on the fly after the fish finish with it are going to be, you know, the hook and the eye. So I said, all right, Tom, that's good enough for me. And as you see, it'll stay on there pretty well. And all right, that's there pretty well. And I can go to the other side. Yeah, come on, get on there at the base of it. Yeah, there it is. That'll stay on good. Okay, so there you have it. There's the finished Sedotti Slammer trout fly. Yeah, with multiple strike triggering qualities. And I'll tell you, as far as any trout streamer fly that I'd seen, I put this up against any trout streamer for catching a real big brown or a rainbow trout anywhere in the world. Thanks a lot.